So this is a presentation about a study we did in the OECD DAC evaluation network. And I guess what triggered this study was the constant discussion we have about similarities and differences between the different evaluation systems. And I think all of us are wondering when we meet, is my system different from yours? Are we doing things the same way? Are we struggling with the same issues? Or am I totally something different from all the others? And then we had some debates about some of the procedures we are following in some of the countries and in some of the meetings. And then that triggered a need to look into the systems in a more systematic way. So next slide, please. What is the evaluation network, the DAC network on development evaluation? It is a network in the Development Assistance Committee of the OECD. It consists of representatives of about 30 different countries. And as you will see, about 37 different evaluation setups and organizations. And in addition to the representatives from UNAID and some representatives of multilateral development institutions like the World Bank, IMF, the regional development banks. UNDP is also a member, an observer in this network, and we are always pleased to see either Indran or another representative from UNDP in our meetings. We meet almost twice a year, about 8 months in between, always in Paris. And we meet for 2 days. And if you turn to the next slide, what do we do in this network? If you start with the green bubble, you see that the primary idea of the network is to share experiences and do peer learning. But we also do some joint evaluation work. And this study I'm going to present is an example of one of these joint evaluation works. We do also produce knowledge products of various kinds, synthesis reports and other knowledge products. And then maybe one of the things that this network has been international known for are the norms and standards when it comes to development evaluation. Next. We also have a resource center where all completed evaluation reports from all the members are submitted into this searchable system. So if you go online, you can search more than 3,000 evaluation reports from all the different countries and in all the different topics. So this is quite useful when we are preparing an evaluation in any country to see what's actually out there, who can we connect with on similar evaluations. Next. And we also have sharing of evaluation plans. Again, for the purpose of being able to get in touch with each other in preparing an evaluation study. Next. And then the Secretariat, we have a small permanent Secretariat based in Paris. They produce an evaluation insight series on topical issues and then draw on experience from the various members' evaluation reports. At the moment, the Secretariat is producing interesting country reports on migration issues, which of course is a big topic in Europe at the moment. Next. And then we have this set of key norms and standards. We have a glossary that has been translated into more than 14 languages. And of course, producing norms and standards is a quite cumbersome process. But it is necessary, and this is widely shared among the evaluation community, both inside the development world, but also outside. Next. But this report, as I mentioned, is a joint work of the network. It was initiated it came out of some of the meetings we had a couple of years ago. And then we established a management group consisting of the DFID evaluation manager, the Secretariat in Paris, and myself. And then we commissioned a consulting company to do the study itself. And it includes quite detailed studies of 37 different evaluation entities and 8 multilateral organizations. Next. And of course, the whole rationale for looking at and using resources to look at details is not only to describe what this is all about, but it is also an effort to explain to a wider audience that a good evaluation system is one of the preconditions for good development work and ultimately sustainable development. So there is a reason why we do focus on evaluations. Next. So in the review, we basically cover 3 wide topics. One is to look at the governance setups in all the evaluation organizations, how it is set up, reporting lines, policies, how the independence or lack of independence of these and secondly, they look at the evaluation processes and the management procedures, the programming, how we assess quality, the capacity, dissemination and use. And then a third point, which I will not go into detail on is the detailed profile for each of the members. So this, if you have any questions to any of the 30 countries that this study covers, I suggest you go into the study and look at the profile of each of the country you're working with. Next. This study is a follow-up of a similar study that was done in 2010. And when we compare the 2 studies, we see some overall trends in development from 2010 to 2016. The first thing that strikes us is to see that there is a much more focus on strategic issues now and strategic questions related to development than it used to be in 2010. There's still quite a few evaluations looking at projects and programs, but the overall trend is a move towards strategic questions. Secondly, again, as you know, this dual objective of evaluation is accountability and learning. But there is a trend, obviously now, a move towards more focus on learning than on accountability, which I think is an interesting finding. Thirdly, it has been an effort and an intention over several years to do more joint evaluations. And the idea, of course, is that collaboration on common topics is useful. But we see now fewer joint evaluations than in 2010. And one explanation is that it takes a lot of efforts to do joint evaluations. It's often quite cumbersome. It requires a lot of consultation, and we see slow processes. So I think this is maybe not worth the cost to do many joint evaluations. Then a fourth trend we see is this, as I know you are also focusing on, the linkage between what is happening at the decentralized level and the centralized level. How do the decentralized level connect with the centralized? What is the quality of what is happening at the decentralized level, etc. And then the fifth point that is, I think we're struggling with, all of us, is to increase the use and the use of the findings, the recommendations, and the knowledge produced by through our evaluation work. So there are several efforts on improving management responses, involvement of stakeholders, etc. So let's, and if we look at the bigger, next please. Some of the trends we see in the bigger picture is that, as you are aware of, the integration between development policy and foreign policy. And that is clearly a trend in Australia, Canada, and New Zealand. They have all given up having a separate development agency and now are fully merged in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. It's going to be interesting to see what is happening in the UK also when it comes to this. Secondly, in the bigger picture, we see establishment of, I would say, untraditional evaluation setups, like the independent DEVAL in Germany, that is independent of all the development agencies in Germany. The expert group on aid in Sweden, that is not an evaluation department, but they do assessment of thematic development issues. And ICAI in the UK, again, looking more at policy issues than traditional evaluation issues. So in the bilateral world, we see a lot of changes and a lot of development. When we compare with the MDBs that we also include in the study, there are much less organizational and governance changes in the MDBs. They seems to have a set structure, This is pretty much the same in 2016 as it was in 2010. And next. Some of the other findings is that now, and I guess that's the case also with many UN organizations, that almost all of the countries do have an evaluation policy in place. And this evaluation policy covers both decentralized evaluations and centralized evaluations. They often include something on management response systems and the role of evaluation in the various setups. We see that the programming of evaluations are more synchronized and more related to overall organizational priorities at the country level, and I guess that's a reflection of more focus on strategic issues. We see a focus on quality assurance. And we have had also in OECD a big debate on the use of external consultants. And I think we should all share a concern with how to be certain about the quality of what is done when we commission evaluations to external consultants. An interesting trend is that we also see a relatively weak involvement of partner country stakeholders, despite all the good intentions from Paris Declaration and Accra. With the involvement, we see that to a limited degree when it comes to the evaluation work. And then I would say an interesting trend and a quite promising trend is more and more focus on independence and how to make sure that credibility, utility, and independence are the basic elements in an evaluation setup. Next. So some of the key issues that this study discusses is these four issues: learning and accountability, decentralized versus centralized, evaluation policy, and demand and use. So let's go into the four topics. Next. So first on the learning versus accountability. There has been some debate, at least in Sweden and Norway, if these are, if accountability is, if it is possible to have both learning and accountability. And some recent researchers suggest that there is a conflict between accountability and learning. I don't believe in this conflict approach, but I do see that we struggle to have a good balance between the two elements. Next. Next. So what we find in this study is that more than half of the organization do find, or in their self-assessment, that they do have a good balance between learning and accountability. 13% favor learning to accountability, and 26% see learning as the sole objective of evaluations. So this is maybe something we can discuss afterwards. Why do you think there is this focus on learning and less on accountability? Next. When it comes to centralized versus decentralized systems, I don't think this is a big surprise. The higher up in the hierarchy the evaluation function is located, the more focus on strategic issues and strategic evaluations, and more on synthesis studies and meta and thematic evaluations. The further down in the organization, the more focus on projects and program evaluations. Again, we find that there is an issue on the quality side, especially when it comes to decentralized evaluations, and also the capacity to do good decentralized evaluations. We just had a review in Norway that pretty much find the same as they found in Canada and the UK. Found that more than 50% of the decentralized evaluations do not have a sufficient quality to be taken seriously. And of course, this is the responsibility of operations to do these decentralized evaluations. So this is a topic we're struggling with on how to address in our bilateral settings. Next. This is just to say that 83% of all the evaluation setups do have an evaluation policy in place, and that is a larger number than in 2010. Next. So then it comes to this one of the topics I am personally quite concerned with, and that is the use or the utility of the findings and recommendations. We see that in this study that there are mixed results when it comes to the demand for evaluations for decision making. There are less than half with report strong demand and about half a moderate demand, while 8 report a weak demand. Of course, when we ask for a self-assessment, most evaluators do think that they do influence decision-making in a certain degree. Most agencies have a management response system in place. This is set up quite differently in the different countries, but again, there are some efforts to exchange views on this and also to improve the quality of these management response systems to make sure that this is taken seriously at the other end. When it comes to formulating recommendations, I think both you and we are again see this as a big challenge, how to involve stakeholders in the process of formulating recommendations, and we find the same in the study. Next. This is about the use of the evaluation findings and recommendations. Similar to the other finding, about 70% do find that the findings are only occasionally used. So again, there is an issue here about making this more systematic. Next. this is more a reflection based on the study, and comes from another study that was done in the network about evaluation culture. And we see that the use of evaluation findings often is reflected or a reflection of the learning culture in the organization we're working with. Next. Next. So we found in this other study that there are 12 lessons to improve the evaluation culture or learning culture. So to base development policy decisions on evidence, that's much easier said than done, of course. Making learning a part of the cultural development cooperation, again, easier said than done. Define a clear role for evaluations. I think we're moving in that direction. Match ambition with adequate resources. Again, we don't yet have the same norm as you have in the UNDP norms and standards about a certain proportion of the operational budget for evaluations, but we're slowly moving in at least addressing the resource concerns. Strengthen program design and management systems, and of course ask the right questions and be realistic about expected results. Next. Choose the right evaluation tools to address the questions, involvement and working together, addressing capacity concerns, act on evaluation findings, communication, and finally the point about evaluators. We think these are some of the issues that needs to be addressed to improve the evaluation culture. So all in all, we and this is the last, no, one more slide, so maybe move to the next. So these are the main points from this study. It is, as I said, a useful study to make sure that we are addressing the same and important issues. This is a good basis for further dialogue within the network, and of course a good way of presenting the differences. Like you in the UN, we have both large organizations and small organizations. We have long-term members of the networks, and we have new members like Hungary as a new member of the Development Assistance Committee and our network. But it is useful to have a study like this as a basis for exchange of experiences moving forward. So I think that ends my presentation. I'm now open for a dialogue with you on similarities and differences and any other issues you would like to bring up.
If I could come in, thank you very much, Pat, for the very comprehensive presentation. I've also experienced for the last 5 years being an observer participant in the network, and many of the ideas that I have gained there have been incorporated into both the work of the UNEG as well as the IEO. So that's been very useful. We are trying to synergize as best we can moving ahead. Just one direct question. We also are challenged with it. We have in our evaluation policy that evaluation is about accountability and learning. We know there's research which argues that these matters can be diametrically opposed. We know there's also a view that through process They are the same thing on both sides of the coin. What has been your personal experience being in the sector for so long on managing this balance? Thank you.
That's a difficult question to respond to. My take at the moment is certainly more on the learning part, and because I truly believe in broad involvement of stakeholders in the evaluation process. To create ownership and understanding of how we reach conclusions when it comes to evaluation processes. So as long as there is an understanding, not interference in the process itself, but to make sure that we do the assessment in an independent way, but do have a broad learning or involvement when it comes to stakeholders. This is also, I guess, a reflection of the rotation system we have in place in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. If we focus too much on accountability, I mean, it's many of the objectives are quite vague and not so clearly formulated. And if we evaluate something that has been initiated a few years ago, the responsible person has moved on to something else. So it's difficult to hold anyone accountable, and it seems to be less possible in our system to actually bring this or to get any action on the basis of the focus on accountability. So maybe this is a more pragmatic approach, but that's certainly my take at the moment.
No, thank you very much, because we're thinking about it deeply. We don't have answers. It remains an ongoing challenge, but we will reflect on it as we expand on the evaluation policy of UNDP and to do that balance. That's been very useful. Thank you.
And if I may come in, prepare our reel here in New York, allow me first a reflection, then a question. To my mind, the notion of balancing accountability and learning doesn't seem to have brought us any further. We've been seized with finding this balance for the 20 odd years that I've been involved with the evaluation function, and I'm no longer convinced that it's a particularly useful endeavor to try to do. At one coming into this on one extreme, for sure they're not mutually exclusive, and a good example to me of that is arguably that of investigation functions in some cases. If learning above all is embodied in behavioral change, well, in that case, there's nothing more powerful than evaluation, by way of both making people jump, but also make them stand accountable. But I submit that it hasn't been so much useful for us in the evaluation community, and the reason is that it masks what is more important thing to deal with, which is that of the spectrum of independence. We all too often have been thinking of independence in this binary terms of being internal or external, and in particular from that the nonsense of thinking of people who are external consultants are somehow therefore independent, which is makes us the laughingstock of our professional peers amongst audits, statisticians, academics, and so on. Anyway, that was a comment that'll stand for my own account. The question I wanted to put to you, Per, is are you seeing any developments yet when it comes to OECD DAC countries and their evaluation functions in any shape responding specifically to the SDG era and policy framework. Much of what's been going on in the recently, of course, has been in so many ways shaped by the MDGs. Now we're 2 years into the SDGs, and has there been any explicit response to that at the level of OECD, DAC, Evaluate as a whole, or amongst individual members, from what you have seen?
Yeah, that's a good question, Arild. I think the only thing I've seen so far is a lot of rhetoric. I think we all refer to the SDGs as a good framework. Then, of course, they also set out some good targets, and there is some agreement to adapt some of these targets also when it comes to evaluations. But again, there is it's always a topic in the meetings to talk about how we deal with the SDGs. But so far, I see this more as a context, broad development framework that we all sign up to, but that has not been operationally used so much when it comes to evaluations. Maybe the exceptions are in some of the sectors, but so far, at least to my knowledge, it has not been directly applied. But there is a lot of reference to the SDGs without this being operationally applied to so much.
Thank you, Per. I'll open for any reflections from colleagues here in New York. Got Vijaya first, please.
Thank you, Per, for sharing that very interesting study of yours. I have a couple of questions. You mentioned during your presentation that there was not much engagement of the national level stakeholders. Can you please share more reflections on that? And the second one, on the point you just mentioned about the SDGs, and how evaluations are approaching it. Do you think that we should even focus so much excessively on SDGs, or should we be actually focusing on national evaluations and national development strategies and capacities to develop evaluation capacities to evaluate the development strategies? Should SDGs be a focus at all? Thank you.
Let me take the second question first, because I think this is a really important point. This is the only sensible way, in my view, to approach the SDG issue. It needs to be owned at the country level. It needs to have the capacity at the country level to be able to assess the development of the SDGs. So I don't know if I still see this is happening, but this is certainly my hope, that this will be a new push towards efforts to build national evaluation capacity. I think you in UNDP, many of the UN organizations, together with many others, like Paris 21 on statistics, some of the training efforts that have the CLARE centers, the IPTET, have some experience to build on. But I really hope that this will mean a new push towards joint efforts for national capacity development, because that's where this is owned. When it comes to the study and the lack of involvement from the national level, I think this is related to how donors do development right now. We take Norway as an example. Only 14% of our development budget goes to traditional bilateral aid. So we have, our partners are primarily civil society organizations, multilateral funds, multilateral organizations. And then, of course, the focus will be on the relationship with the partners and not to the end users of often joint efforts in the next stage. So there is a focus on decision making and how to deal with the various channels, and thus this is further away from the end users and the stakeholders. At least that's what I see. And even though many of the evaluations do include field missions, but this is more to use the representatives at the field level to assess what is being done by these partners. Yeah.
Thank you. For further colleagues' reflections, please feel free. Alan, you're leaning forward.
Why did you lean forward?
Because I have a question, of course. Hello, Per, how are you? And thank you for the chance to listen and to get a sense of this quite interesting study. One of the things that you reflected on, and we certainly have been discussing here, is the issue of joint evaluations, and that your study is showing that there have been less of them, or fewer of them being conducted. Over this last period, we've conducted several. They are frustrating. They do take longer. Yet there are a number of issues that keep coming up to suggest that we should be doing more of them. In particular, we have board members who keep saying, we want you to do joint evaluations. And we have the UN Development Assistance Framework and other mechanisms that are suggesting that a UN agency should be operating as one, and that would suggest evaluating as one. You raised an issue or a mention in Europe in terms of some of the migration issues that we've now seen come together as a quite integrated 3RP program. That you would suggest, you would think, would lend itself very much to an opportunity to jointly evaluate the work that the UN and other organizations and agencies and bilaterals are working on in Lebanon and Jordan and Turkey and Iraq because of the Syrian conflict. And the question is, when we see those kinds of opportunities in the future, how should we start planning for them in a way that makes this kind of a work actually possible? I think when we've looked back over the last decade, there's very few instances where we've actually had both bilateral and multilateral organizations evaluating together. The Indian Ocean tsunami, for instance, being one where that was that effort. When we see these things, how do we do a better job of organizing up front, recognizing the long timescales that are necessary for us to be able to prepare for that kind of a joint evaluation?
Thank you, Alan. You certainly have a convincing argument to do joint evaluations. But still, I'm not quite sure if it is the cost benefit will balance towards joint evaluations. Maybe, and maybe that's my tentative take on this at the moment, we have done some synthesis studies where we have drawn on lessons from several evaluations done by different organizations. And these seems to have, they're easier to do, of course, and they seem to have some merit. So maybe synthesis studies building on various evaluation efforts are easier to do. At least we have tried even to do some joint Nordic evaluations without much success. I would say they have been extremely difficult to complete and to agree on the main conclusions. Maybe this study I have just presented can be considered to be a joint evaluation, but this was clearly managed by us with a very small management team. But still, it was quite an effort to make sure that we listen to all the stakeholders in the process. I do hesitate in embarking on new joint evaluations, but I agree with you, Alan, on migration issues and some of the humanitarian crisis countries. There are certainly a good argument to do it, but how to do it, I honestly, I'm struggling with finding a good answer to that.
It's true that joint evaluation is both necessary and sufficient, but sadly is not possible. It seems to be bureaucratic constraints that come in the way. Allow me, Per, on a side note, having the benefit of your mind and presence, we've had a couple of informal occasions on the sidelines to discuss informally, and it's about the OECD DAC criteria. They have, of course, given shape to evaluation activity, not just amongst OECD donors, but more broadly in the development cooperation arena, including the multilateral organizations and the UN. They're nearly 20 years, more than 20 years, I believe, from 91 is the first notation I have recorded, and I'm wondering if you have any reflections at all to share on the continued efficacy I'm using the word to avoid the criteria themselves in the evolving development cooperation arena. Do you have any reflections at all to share?
The fact that you point out that these are more than 20 years old, I think that reflects a need to revisit the principles. I still think that more or less they're quite useful, at least as a basis for evaluations, but they do not cover some cross-cutting issues and some specific issues. I agree. So we have started, and I hope to have a dialogue with you also on how to address these questions of revisiting the principles. And we have a similar discussions with the MDBs, and there is a blog post in IG that Caroline Hyder is managing, that also brings up some issues related to the principles or the criteria. So I think we are in the process of slowly thinking how to go about to revisit these topics. My goal is to have a broad agreement across the development evaluation field. You have just, as I mentioned, completed UNA norms and standards. You know how much it takes of efforts to conclude a process like this. So we need to again think about how to do it, but to have a useful dialogue on what is needed to be done. I'm open to, and I know the Secretariat in OECD is also open to have a dialogue around this.
Thank you very much, Per. I will. Is Imran? Are you with us and have further thoughts or questions, reflections, Imran? If so, of course, you're welcome.
Yes, just to say, yeah, thank you very much. Most useful and timely. Thanks to the colleagues also from New York, from our office. We take it on board. We also take on board, in particular, the issue on joint evaluations. And we need to actually push back when we just asked to do this. Those that have done it know the challenges around that issue. But we'll continue to work collaboratively, and thank you, Per, from my end here.
If there are any further, I see no heads nodding, and I think you've been very kind in staying up. This constitutes after hours in Oslo, and you have nice early summer evenings there. And so Imran is in Santiago, Chile, so he's still ahead also. But thank you very much again, Per, for providing us this briefing and presentation, and we thank you very much for your time, and we look forward to our continued engagement, and once again, thank you very much.
Well, thank you to all of you for participating and for inviting me to share this. I always value a dialogue with good colleagues in UNDP and other parts of the UN system also. So I appreciate this chance to have a dialogue. As to the Norwegian summer night, as you know, this is bright and clear and still sunny outside. So in our terms, we don't need much sleep this time of the year. So it's still a long evening to go. So thank you so much.
Yeah.